cartel.
This video depicts part of the kidnapping, appearing to show one woman walking on her own, forced into a white pickup truck. Armed men with bulletproof vests are then seen dragging other people into the vehicle.
A strict do not travel alert posted to 6 additional Mexican states, all due to an increased risk of crime and kidnapping, including a high level of drug cartel violence.
Since the early 2000s, cartel and gang criminal activities have overwhelmed the country of Mexico, causing panic and dismay among its communities and people. These criminal organizations are known for extortion, narcotics trafficking, armed robbery, and worst of all, kidnapping. Abduction and ransom has become a source of income for cartels and gangs over the past decades, and it's considered one of the top reasons for travel warnings in the United States. Over time, these cartels have continued to grow bolder. They began targeting foreigners, especially Americans who journeyed across the border, and these instances have led to some of the most brutal cartel kidnappings ever. Before 2020, kidnapping cases were at an all-time high, but it's extremely hard to calculate a specific number due to the fact that most of these cases go unreported. The reason is that kidnapping and abduction for ransom happen so often in Mexico, especially in the states of Colima, Michoacán, Sinaloa, and Tamaulipas. The frequent occurrence of these crimes has investigators and detectives running in circles, and usually these crimes don't get solved until it's too late. Banking companies in these areas started giving out ransom loans because of the countless kidnappings and extortions. At the end of the day, that is what it's all about. It's about money. These kidnappers want to make money off the civilians. They plan elaborate kidnappings, then make family members pay to get their loved ones back, and most of the time, the victims don't make it back alive. There are a few reasons why kidnappings happen. It could be extortion kidnapping, where criminals may threaten a business or family to pay them a certain amount of money, or else they will kidnap or harm their loved ones. Then, there's kidnapping for human trafficking. Some cartels plan random kidnappings and force the victims into human trafficking, including sex trafficking and forced labor. There's also kidnapping for revenge and retaliation, which is something that's often done between rival criminal groups and cartels. These incidents happen very frequently and usually end in death. In the early 2000s, Edgar Valdez Villarreal, the former crime boss and member of the Beltran Leyva cartel, recorded what was considered the first execution video, in which he tortured and killed members of the Los Zetas cartel, who were his rivals. The video was sent to an American news broadcaster as a way to publicize the cartel's viciousness.
And against rival gang members, murder. Police say you can hear LaBarbie's voice interrogating these men just before they're executed.
After this video was released, other major cartels and criminal groups began adopting this savage propaganda method. There are news websites dedicated to this specific type of cartel violence and rivalry. It has become almost a ritual for cartels to capture rival gang members and have them executed. You could literally go onto websites like Narco del Blog and see these extremely graphic videos being documented by actual cartels. Do keep in mind that these videos are graphic and violent in nature. They are real-life execution videos, so please, think twice before you watch them. Next, there is kidnapping for recruitment. Criminal organizations may forcibly recruit individuals, particularly young people, into their gangs by kidnapping and coercing them into joining. Lastly, the most common and traditional form of abduction is kidnapping for ransom. Kidnappers forcibly abduct and hold someone captive, then demand payment from their family or friends for their release. The best example of this would be the case of Miriam and Karen Rodriguez.
Los secuestradores de mi hija, uno fue recapturado, pero uno aún sigue libre. A raíz de eso, yo también pedí seguridad.
Some of you might be familiar with the name Miriam Rodriguez. She was a human rights activist who took down 10 cartel members in Mexico. From 2007 to 2012, the state of Tamaulipas was overrun by cartel criminal activities and violence. According to the New York Times, San Fernando is located next to the main road going north through Tamaulipas, which leads to the United States. The large system of dirt roads and open land in the area makes it a perfect route for smuggling narcotics. It's basically the holy grail of the narcotics world. Many people were forced to abandon their communities and move to other places for safety reasons. Miriam's family had mostly moved away from the area, but she and her daughter remained in San Fernando, Tamaulipas. In 2012, Miriam's daughter, Karen Rodriguez, was abducted by the Los Zetas gang, one of the most violent and dangerous narcotic trafficking cartels in Mexico. The method that they used was considered pretty common. The gang saw Karen driving and encircled her, blocking her exits, making it impossible for her to escape. Then they came out with guns to force Karen out of her car and abducted her. The Los Zetas cartel is known for its violent nature and its shock and awe tactic, which consists of torture, murder, and kidnapping. The gang was formed in the 1990s when former Mexican soldiers came together to create an enforcement wing for the Gulf Cartel. The Zetas officially declared their independence from the Gulf Cartel in 2010, and that's when the major turf wars broke out between the two organizations, causing people to suffer. Turf wars happen when rival gangs battle for territory or smuggling routes leadership. It's like a Hunger Game for these cartels. They usually end in bloodshed and mass casualties. Yet these people couldn't care less for the well-being of civilians, though the Los Zetas had a reputation for being particularly violent towards their victims and enemies.
Last week, you had the worst massacre in this entire drug war, with 72 migrants killed by the Zetas, one of the drug cartels that operates primarily just below Laredo and Brownsville, Texas.
The level of brutality inflicted on the public by these criminals is horrifying. Receiving the news that your family or friends have been abducted by a cartel is equivalent to a death sentence. Unfortunately, Karen Rodriguez fell victim to these cartels' ruthless ways. Shortly after the kidnapping incident, Karen's family started receiving ransom demands from the abductors. And of course, the authorities were no help, because there were so many kidnappings and disappearance cases in San Fernando that the authorities barely had time to look at any cases individually. But Miriam and her family didn't give up. They fought for Karen to be returned to them. Miriam and her husband had to take out a loan to pay for the ransom. The family was willing to comply with any requests, as long as their daughter was safe. They paid the money and waited. But Karen never returned. Miriam was able to get one of the gang members to meet up with her, and she begged him to return her daughter. The guy never gave her a direct answer, but they told her they would help her for a fee. Basically, these people were only trying to extract money from Miriam and had no intention of releasing her daughter. Everything became pointless and unresolved. Still, Miriam was determined to get her daughter back, so she began her undercover detective life. She started scouring the web for any traces of the gang member she met up with, stalking their social media, changing her appearance to spy on them, and collecting all the evidence she could. This woman was determined to find her daughter. Finally, after months of detective work, Miriam managed to collect all the evidence she needed. She brought everything she found to local law enforcement officials, but they still didn't care enough to do anything. At this point, there were more than 700,000 cases of missing people, and the rate of homicide had doubled in Mexico. So no law enforcement authority had the time to take a look at the evidence that Miriam had collected. It took some time for Miriam to find someone who was willing to help her, but by then, the suspects had already disappeared again. Miriam refused to give in to the situation. She went undercover again, identifying and locating more gang members, until she finally hit the jackpot. She helped authorities locate a young man by the name of Cristian Jose Zapata Gonzalez, an 18-year-old who led them to discover Karen's last known location. The young man led them to an abandoned ranch house near San Fernando, Tamaulipas, Mexico, that was left in alarming conditions. Sadly, by the time they got there, it was too late. Nothing was left, except random objects and human remains. In 2015, forensics finally concluded that Karen's remains were indeed among the ones discovered at the ranch house. Miriam spent 3 years searching for her daughter, yet she was hit with a devastating ending. Over the next few years, Miriam dedicated her life to human rights activism. She never stopped searching for the people who took her daughter. One by one, she hunted them down and brought them to justice. She practically took the law into her own hands. Some people saw Miriam as a vigilante, but others thought of her as a hero. However, in May 2017, Miriam was killed by the cartel members she helped put away. Miriam spent 3 years of her life tracking down her daughter's abductor, only for her to die by their hands. This story was nothing but tragedy. At the end of the day, Miriam was just a mother who wanted to give meaning to her daughter's life. This ordeal started with one action, all because this cartel had to target an innocent woman. The situation not only affected the victim, but her entire family. The Zetas took 2 lives from the Rodriguez family, and they will continue to inflict this brutality on other people in the community if nothing is done. Remember, there are hundreds and thousands of disappearance and abduction cases in the country. Not everyone could react the way Miriam did, and many of these cases go unreported. There are families out there who simply never knew what happened to their loved ones.
Family members of one survivor, Latavia Washington McGee, expect the mother of 6 back home soon after a trip to Mexico turned into a nightmare.
An incident that hits closer to home is the case of the 4 kidnapped Americans in Tamaulipas in 2023. This story begins with Latavia McGee, a South Carolina native who wanted to pursue cosmetic treatment in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. She wanted to get an abdominoplasty, better known as a tummy tuck. You might be wondering why she couldn't get the procedure done in America. Why travel to another country? Well, because medical tourism is a huge deal across the border. Apparently, cosmetic medical facilities in Mexico are known for their amazing ratings and hospitality. But the best part is the low-cost treatment. In the United States, medical expenses are quite high, and not everyone has medical insurance. And even if they do, it doesn't cover non-medical procedures like a tummy tuck. So a lot of Americans travel across the border to receive simple medical treatment for a better deal.
2 million Americans travel to Mexico and other foreign nations each year for cosmetic procedures, lap band surgery, and also dentistry at bargain prices.
Medical tourism is a huge industry and it's growing. Until we get costs down here in the United States, it's going to continue to grow.
Latavia McGee was one of those people. However, because McGee was nervous about traveling alone to a different country, she decided to enlist the help of some of her friends. McGee asked her friends Eric Williams, Cheryl Orange, Shaid Woodard, and Zindel Brown to accompany her to Tamaulipas. Unfortunately, on the day of the trip, Cheryl Orange had to stay behind in Texas because she didn't bring proper identification. So the 4 went ahead and crossed the border without Orange. Everything seemed fine until the group noticed a strange car following them.
We turned down this little side road because we was going to see if that led us to the destination and we was going to turn around. We heard a car beat the horn and pulled around us. Zindel was in the back seat. He said, "Don't stop." He saw a gun.
Clearly, the people in that car were up to no good. Once again, they utilized the same method by running them off the road and coming out with their firearms, forcing the Americans out of the car. Strangely, the entire kidnapping process was recorded by bystanders.
This video depicts part of the kidnapping, appearing to show one woman walking on her own, forced into a white pickup truck. Armed men with bulletproof vests are then seen dragging other people into the vehicle.
The recording later went viral and was the key evidence in identifying the 4 Americans. Almost immediately, they knew this was the result of cartel activities because of the way it was executed. Mexican and American authorities worked collaboratively to locate the missing people. On March 7, 2023, the authorities finally located the missing Americans in a red wooden shack on the outskirts of Matamoros. Unfortunately, Latavia McGee and Eric Williams were the only ones who survived the attack. Shaid Woodard and Zindel Brown's lifeless bodies were recovered from the shack. It was reported that they tried to resist and flee during the abduction and were gunned down by members of the cartel. Latavia McGee and Eric Williams suffered from severe injuries and were given medical help immediately. Mexican authorities claimed that the Americans were attacked because their abductor had mistaken them for rival cartel members. But the U.S. believed they were targeted specifically because they were foreigners. Although it was confirmed that this abduction incident was the work of a criminal group, the authorities remained clueless as to which cartel was involved. Then, out of nowhere, Mexican authorities obtained a letter that cracked the case wide open. But it's not just any letter. It's an apology letter. That's right. A major criminal organization wrote an apology letter expressing their remorse for the killing and kidnapping of the 2 Americans, and that it goes against their motto to not harm innocent people. Along with the letter were 5 cartel members who reportedly were directly involved with the abduction. The apology letter was revealed to be from the Gulf Cartel.
These 3, plus another known as the Gulf Cartel, are the most powerful in the country.
The Gulf Cartel is the oldest cartel in Mexico.
The Gulf Cartel is probably the oldest cartel in Mexico. They were founded in the 1930s and have been smuggling illegal goods into the United States since the Prohibition era. The gang grew rapidly in the 1970s and quickly became one of the most powerful cartels in the country. But after the arrest of their former leader, Garcia Abrego, the cartel experienced a downgrade in prominence. The Gulf Cartel was also responsible for forming the paramilitary group Los Zetas, who later broke free from them and became their rival. It's unclear whether the nature of the letter was true. Was it truly a mistake or a purposeful act? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, 2 lives were lost, and the survivors of this attack would never be the same again. Whether it was Karen Rodriguez, Shaid Woodard, or Zindel Brown, these were innocent people. They did nothing wrong, yet they were mercilessly murdered because of pure savagery. The damage is done, and these families have to suffer the pain of losing their loved ones for the remainder of their lives. And these illegal activities will continue to happen if someone doesn't put a stop to it. However, we cannot shift the blame completely to law enforcement officials, because the origin of the problem are the criminal organizations and cartels. Their roots run deep within the core of the country. If they eliminate one organization or cartel leader, another one will replace them. It's challenging to battle cartel violence and brutality. Therefore, the best recommended course of action for Mexicans as well as Americans is to learn to protect yourself. First, as a foreigner, you need to read the travel warnings. It only takes 1 second to look them up on your devices.
A strict do not travel alert posted to 6 additional Mexican states, all due to an increased risk of crime and kidnapping, including a high level of drug cartel violence.
It's understandable that Americans would have a tendency to cross the border without consulting any travel guide or reading the warnings, because Mexico is very close to the U.S. But for safety reasons, please read the travel warnings. It may save your life. Also, if you are in a situation where you think you're in trouble, especially on the road, there are ways to help you get out of those situations. As you can tell, these cartel members are targeting people on the road. So be very careful when you're driving in a foreign setting. The first thing you need to do is not panic. Keep thinking of ways to get out of these situations, and use anything as a tool, especially your car. There are many self-defense tutorials and classes out there. Look them up for resources and references. They might come in handy one day. You can never be too careful. Keep a lookout, act fast, and stay safe. Would you travel to another country for a cosmetic procedure? Also, would you consider reading the travel warnings for a cross-country trip? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.